Paris, France. July 1st, 1944. 5:40 p.m. The telephone line crackles with static between the elegant headquarters of Commander-in-Chief West and the imposing Führerbunker in Berlin. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Germany's most senior and respected commander, a man whose family had served in the Prussian military for 4 centuries, presses the receiver to his ear. On the other end, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Wehrmacht High Command, is nearly hysterical. 25 days after Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the Western Front was collapsing. Cherbourg has fallen. Almost 100,000 German soldiers are dead, wounded, or captured. American tanks are breaking through hedgerows, British forces are hammering toward Caen, and Adolf Hitler has just refused, once again, to allow a tactical withdrawal. Keitel's voice rises to a panicked wail. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" The 68-year-old Field Marshal, a veteran of both world wars, a tactical genius who had conquered Poland and France, draws a long breath on his cigarette. His response will end his command. It will become one of the most honest and damning statements ever spoken within the German High Command. 4 words that encapsulate the madness gripping Nazi Germany in its final year. "Make peace, you fools," Rundstedt bellows into the phone. "What else can you do?" Then he slams down the receiver. Within 24 hours, he'll be dismissed from command. But this moment, this explosive outburst of military realism against political insanity, represents something far more significant. It's the story of how Adolf Hitler's refusal to allow retreats destroyed his own armies. It's the story of how one of Germany's greatest generals finally told the truth. And it's the story of a collision between 2 philosophies of war, one tactical, one fanatical, that would seal the fate of the Third Reich. This is what Rundstedt said when Hitler refused to retreat from Patton, a story that begins not in July 1944, but 6 weeks earlier, on the beaches of Normandy. June 6, 1944. The Allied invasion explodes across 5 beaches in Normandy, despite years of preparation, despite the massive fortifications of the Atlantic Wall, despite Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's desperate attempts to position forces directly on the coast. The Allies establish their beachhead. German commanders immediately recognize what must be done. Tactical retreat to consolidate forces. Strategic withdrawal to defensible positions. These are the basic principles of military science, the lessons learned through centuries of warfare. But Adolf Hitler operates under different rules. Since the brutal winter of 1941 on the Eastern Front, when his Stand Fast order arguably prevented a complete rout by Soviet forces, Hitler has become convinced of one immutable principle: German soldiers never retreat. Every inch of ground, he insists, must be defended to the death. To withdraw is to admit defeat. To retreat is to lose morale. In Hitler's mind, willpower alone can stop tanks. Determination can defeat superior firepower, and fanaticism can overcome tactical reality. Rundstedt knows better. Born in 1875 into Prussian military nobility, educated in the rigorous traditions of German staff work, he represents everything Hitler is not. Where Hitler is emotional, Rundstedt is analytical. Where Hitler sees symbolism, Rundstedt sees logistics. Where Hitler demands miracles, Rundstedt calculates possibilities. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, who served as his chief of staff, once said of him, "As an exponent of grand tactics, he was brilliant, a talented soldier who grasped the essentials of any problem in an instant. But grasping problems and solving them are 2 different things when your supreme commander lives in a fantasy." 5 days after D-Day, the conflict between Hitler's strategic vision and his field commander's tactical reality begins to crystallize around a single objective: the port of Cherbourg. The Americans, driving north through the Cotentin Peninsula, aim to capture this vital harbour. For the Allies, Cherbourg represents logistics, the ability to land troops and supplies directly into France. For Hitler, it represents something else entirely: a point of resistance that will delay Allied build-up, deny them resources, and buy time for the decisive counterattack he's planning. Rundstedt and Rommel see only futility in defending Cherbourg. 3 German divisions were trapped on a peninsula with no hope of reinforcement or escape. Better, they argue, to withdraw those troops, strengthen the main defensive line, and preserve forces for the counteroffensive. Hitler sees betrayal in this thinking. He orders the port defended for at least 1 month by no fewer than 3 divisions. Here's what makes this moment critical. Rundstedt and Rommel are thinking tactically. They're concerned with preserving combat power, maintaining unit cohesion and avoiding encirclement. Hitler is thinking strategically. Every day Cherbourg holds is another day the Allies can't use its port facilities. Every German soldier who dies there is trading his life to delay Allied logistics by weeks or even months. The tragedy is that both are partially correct, and both are doomed to failure. To a simple communication error, only one German division and confused elements of two others managed to enter Cherbourg before the Americans cut off the peninsula. The garrison is too weak to significantly delay the assault. On June 29, Cherbourg falls. The defence has bought Hitler perhaps 10 days instead of the month he demanded. The human cost: thousands of German soldiers dead or captured who could have strengthened the main defensive line. Rundstedt is devastated, not by the loss of Cherbourg itself, but by what it represents. The German army in the west is being destroyed piecemeal by a supreme commander who refuses to understand the basic mathematics of warfare. You cannot hold territory without troops. You cannot launch offensives without reserves. You cannot win by refusing to maneuver, and the Americans have yet to truly unleash their most dangerous weapon. Lieutenant General George S. Uhl, Patton, sitting in an orchard in Normandy, munching in an apple, is growing impatient. His Third Army exists on paper but not in action. Eisenhower has forbidden him from taking command until the breakout from Normandy succeeds. But Patton knows what's coming. He studied the German dispositions. He understands their weakness. And when his moment arrives, he will exploit it with a ferocity that will terrify even hardened Wehrmacht commanders. But first, the German High Command must survive the next conversation with Hitler, June 29, 1944. 11 days after the invasion. Hitler summons Rundstedt and Rommel to a meeting. The Führer presses them for details on the counterattack, the decisive blow that will split the Allied beachhead and drive them back into the sea. Rundstedt suggests attacking the British near Caen is the critical sector, he argues. Success there could separate Allied forces and deny them access to Paris. Hitler accepts the idea but adds a condition: Cherbourg must continue to be defended according to the original plans. Even as they speak, news arrives that the Americans have cut across the base of the peninsula. The Cherbourg garrison is isolated. Hitler immediately authorises withdrawal into the fortifications, but his orders include impossible qualifications. At least 3 divisions must fall back. They must fight for every inch. They must hold for no less than a month. It's already too late. The orders never reach the field in time. Cherbourg is effectively lost before Hitler's demands can even be attempted. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation deteriorates further. The British launch massive attacks toward Caen. The Germans commit their precious reserves not to the planned counter-offensive, but to defensive operations just to hold the line. The Allied air forces dominate the sky. Every German movement in daylight brings instant destruction. Supply convoys are obliterated. Headquarters units are bombed out of existence. The counterattack headquarters Rundstedt had activated is destroyed by a lucky Allied air strike before it could even function. By late June, Rundstedt had reached a grim conclusion. The German army in the west faces 2 choices: surrender or withdraw across France to the German border. Either option is unthinkable to Hitler. Rundstedt warns Keitel that unless the front is stabilised, fundamental decisions will have to be made. Keitel complains about how the battle is progressing. Rundstedt snarls back, "If you think you can do any better, come down here and lead this filth yourself." The contempt in that statement is palpable. This is not defeatist speaking. This is a professional soldier who has watched political leadership destroy his army through ignorance and stubbornness. On July 1, Rundstedt requests permission to withdraw troops behind the Orne River in Normandy. It's a modest request, not a full retreat, just a tactical adjustment to prevent a complete encirclement and destruction of German forces in the Caen sector. The request goes to Hitler. Hitler's answer comes back at 5:40 p.m. No. Hold the line. No retreat. Every position will be defended. That's when Rundstedt makes the phone call to Keitel. That's when nearly 50 years of military discipline, aristocratic composure and professional restraint finally break. "What shall we do?" Keitel wails. And Rundstedt delivers the most brutally honest assessment anyone in the German High Command has dared to speak aloud. "Make peace, you fools. What else can you do?" The next day, July 2nd, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt is relieved of command. The official announcement attributes his departure to age and ill health. The real reason is understood by everyone in the Wehrmacht. He has told Hitler an unforgivable truth. Germany is losing the war, and only a negotiated peace can prevent destruction. Hitler replaces him with Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, a competent commander who immediately sends Hitler a frank assessment that confirms everything Rundstedt said. German casualties, 97,000 men, including 2,360 officers. German replacements, only 10,000. German equipment losses, catastrophic. Allied air superiority, absolute. Von Kluge's conclusion: the moment is fast approaching when this overtaxed front line is bound to break up. Hitler's response remains unchanged. Holds line, no retreat, victory through willpower. 3 weeks later, the consequences of this insanity become impossible to ignore. On July 25th, the Americans launched Operation Cobra. The breakout from Normandy begins, and George Patton finally gets his chance. Patton's Third Army becomes operational on August 1st, 1944. Within days, American armoured columns are racing across France at speeds that shock both Allied and German commanders. Patton's tanks cover 50 miles in one day, then 60, then more. They liberate towns before German forces even know they're coming. They cut supply lines, encircle divisions, and create chaos throughout the German rear areas. This is mobile warfare at its most devastating. This is what Rundstedt had feared, and what Hitler had made inevitable by refusing to allow tactical withdrawals when they might have preserved German combat power. The German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army are caught in a pocket at Falaise. Hitler orders them to hold their positions. Rundstedt's replacement, von Kluge, tries desperately to execute an orderly withdrawal. It's too late. The Falaise Pocket becomes a slaughter. 50,000 Germans are captured. 10,000 are killed. The roads are littered with destroyed equipments, dead horses, and the remnants of units that could have escaped if permitted to retreat days earlier. And Patton is still accelerating. By September, the Third Army had covered 400 miles. They've liberated most of France. They're approaching the German border, and they've done it against an enemy that might have stopped them if that enemy had been permitted to fight intelligently, to trade space for time, to conduct the kind of mobile defence that German commanders had perfected on the Eastern Front. But Hitler has forbidden that kind of warfare in the West. Every city must be held as a fortress. Every port must be defended to the last man. Retreat equals cowardice. Withdrawal equals treason. And so the German army in the West is destroyed not primarily by Allied superiority, though that is overwhelming, but by its own supreme commander's refusal to allow it to fight effectively. Here's the bitter irony. Rundstedt's judgment isn't entirely wrong. On September 1, Hitler recalls the old field marshal from retirement. The Western Front is in chaos. Allied forces are approaching the German border. Someone needs to restore order. And despite everything that happened in July, despite the telephone conversation that ended in his dismissal, despite his blunt assessment that Germany should make peace, Hitler needs Rundstedt's expertise. The two men meet. Hitler treats Rundstedt with unwanted diffidence and respect. Rundstedt, for his part, sits motionless and monosyllabic. The trust between them is gone, but the need remains. Hitler offers Rundstedt command of the West again. Rundstedt accepts. Not out of loyalty to Hitler, not out of faith in victory, but because the German army needs competent leadership in its death throes, and Rundstedt is, above all else, a German officer. What Hitler doesn't tell Rundstedt immediately is that he's planning one final gamble, one last offensive that will attempt to prove Hitler's strategic vision correct and Rundstedt's tactical realism wrong. The operation that will become known as the Battle of the Bulge. When Rundstedt learns of Hitler's plan in late October, he is appalled. The operation calls for 3 German armies to attack through the Ardennes forest, drive to Antwerp, and split the Allied forces in two. It is, in Hitler's mind, a reprise of the 1940 victory that made Germany master of Europe. It is, in Rundstedt's assessment, a fantasy. Rundstedt and Field Marshal Walter Model, who commands Army Group B, develop an alternative plan they call the Small Solution. Instead of driving all the way to Antwerp, a distance of over 100 miles to enemy-held territory with inadequate forces, they propose a more limited offensive. Encircle and destroy the American First Army. Secure the Meuse River crossings. Create a crisis that might force the Allies to pause their advance. It's achievable. It's realistic. It might actually work. Hitler categorically rejects it. He wants the big solution. Antwerp or nothing. The grand strategic masterstroke that will change the course of the war. Rundstedt and Model are ordered to execute Hitler's plan, not their own. On December 16, 1944, the attack began. For 48 hours, it appears Hitler might be proven right. German forces achieve complete surprise. American units are overrun. The Ardennes front collapses. A massive bulge forms in the Allied lines. German spearheads drive toward the Meuse River. Hitler's gamble seems to be paying off. Then reality reasserts itself. The Americans hold the vital crossroads town of Bastogne. Allied air power, grounded by bad weather during the initial attack, returns with devastating effect. American reinforcements pour into the threatened sector, and from the south, with a speed that astonishes even his own superiors, George Patton disengages his entire Third Army from its current offensive, pivots 90 degrees north, and slams into the southern flank of the German penetration. Patton's relief of Bastogne on December 26th is a logistical and tactical miracle. He's moved an entire army, over 100,000 men with their equipment and supplies, across icy roads in the middle of winter, and launched them into a new offensive in under 72 hours. The Third Army tears into the German flank. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last great gamble, begins to collapse. By late January 1945, the Germans were back where they started. They've lost over 100,000 men, irreplaceable veterans and precious equipment destroyed in an offensive that achieved nothing strategic. The small solution might have created local advantages. The big solution has created a catastrophe, and Rundstedt has been proven correct once again. Germany needed to make peace. Instead, Hitler has consumed the last reserves in a pointless offensive that only accelerated the final defeat. But Hitler still won't allow retreat. As Patton's forces and the rest of the Allied armies close on the Rhine River, Hitler demands that every inch of German soil be defended. Rundstedt tries to organize a coherent defense. It's impossible. The troops are exhausted. Supplies are non-existent. The Luftwaffe can barely fly. And still, Hitler issues orders forbidding withdrawal, demanding counterattacks, living in a fantasy where willpower can substitute for divisions that no longer exist. On March 7, 1945, came the final humiliation. American troops of the 9th Armored Division reach the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen and discover it still standing, undemolished, a clear path into the heart of Germany. They attack immediately. Within hours, American forces are pouring across the Rhine. Hitler's reaction is predictable. He doesn't blame the local commanders who failed to destroy the bridge. He doesn't acknowledge that the chaotic German defense made such failures inevitable. He blames Rundstedt. On March 10, 1945, for the third and final time, Field Marshal von Rundstedt was dismissed from command. The next day, he meets with Hitler one last time. The Führer presents him with the swords to his Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest military decorations. He thanks Rundstedt for his loyalty. The old Field Marshal accepts the award in silence. Both men know what it means. This is farewell. The war is lost. Germany will be destroyed, and everything Rundstedt said on that July evening in 1944 has come true. Make peace, you fools. What else can you do? Hitler couldn't make peace. His ideology wouldn't permit it. His political position couldn't survive it. His psychological makeup couldn't accept it. And so Germany fought on for another 2 months. Berlin fell. Hitler committed suicide, and the Third Reich, which was supposed to last 1,000 years, ended in rubble and total defeat. Rundstedt survived. He was captured by American forces on May 1, 1945, at a sanitarium where he was being treated for a leg injury. He was interrogated, held as a war crime suspect, and brought to Nuremberg to testify. He was never tried, partly due to his age and failing health, partly because prosecutors recognized that he had been a professional soldier, not a Nazi ideologue. He was released in 1949. He lived in poverty in Hanover with his wife until he died in 1953. The preacher at his funeral said, "We are burying the last of the great Prussians." History has debated Rundstedt's legacy. Was he a brilliant commander hamstrung by Hitler's interference, or was he complicit in the crimes of the regime he served? The truth, as always, is complicated. He never joined the Nazi Party. He was aware of plots against Hitler, but never participated in them. He presided over the court of honor that expelled officers involved in the July 20th bomb plot, essentially sentencing them to death in civilian courts. He commanded armies that committed atrocities in occupied territories, though he personally ordered nothing of the sort. But on one point, history is clear. When it came to military strategy in the final year of the war, Rundstedt was right and Hitler was wrong. The refusal to allow tactical retreats destroyed German armies that might have prolonged the defense. The insistence on holding every position robbed German commanders of the flexibility that was their greatest strength. The fantasy of decisive counteroffensives consumed reserves that could have conducted fighting withdrawals. Hitler's strategic vision in the West wasn't brilliant. It was madness masked as willpower. Patton understood this. After the war, he said of German commanders, "They're not supermen, they're just good soldiers fighting for a madman." The German generals understood it too. That's why so many of them, after the war, tried to explain that they would have won if only Hitler hadn't interfered. It's a convenient excuse, one that absolves them of responsibility for serving the regime until the bitter end. But Rundstedt never made that excuse. He never claimed he could have won. He never pretended Hitler was the only problem. He made one statement, one time, in a moment of complete honesty. Make peace. What else can you do? It was the only rational option. And because Hitler couldn't accept it, millions more died in a war that was already lost. So what should we take from this story? What does Rundstedt's outburst teach us about leadership, about war, about the collision between ideology and reality? Perhaps it's this: truth matters more than loyalty to a lie. Professional competence matters more than political faith, and the courage to speak honestly, even when it costs you everything, is the rarest and most valuable form of bravery. Rundstedt lost his command for telling the truth. But he was right. And 70 years later, that moment on July 1, 1944, when a 68-year-old field marshal finally lost his patience with a dictator's delusions, stands as one of the most honest assessments anyone gave of Germany's situation in World War II. Make peace, you fools. What else can you do? If you found this story fascinating, drop a comment below. Do you think Rundstedt was a brilliant general betrayed by Hitler's incompetence? Or was he complicit in serving a criminal regime? The truth is probably somewhere in between, but I want to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of World War II's most dramatic confrontations, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from history's most pivotal moments. Next time, we'll explore another moment when a military commander had to choose between truth and loyalty, with consequences that changed the course of history. The last of the great Prussians is gone, but his words remain. A warning from history about what happens when military professionals are forced to serve political madness, when retreat becomes treason, and when honesty becomes the most dangerous act of all.